So I did want to go through I would like you to read this code. I know this it's not the kind of document that's meant to be read through. It's a reference document, to be looked at for guidance topically. But take a look at it, get a sense of what's in there. And again, we will be focusing on canons 1, 4, and 5, which are the ones I think that create they're most referenced and most useful, and also most troublesome. For instance, take a look at Canon 1. The Canon 1 says that engineers must hold paramount, put first, the safety, health, and welfare of the public. This is to my knowledge, this is an absolutely unique ethical principle in terms of professional ethics, because it basically says that every engineer has a duty to the public at large. That is not really, I think, a part of legal or medical ethics, the notion that a doctor or a lawyer must hold paramount, put first basically the welfare of the whole society, of the world, of all people. This is probably necessary because of the nature of what engineers do. They work with technology, and when an engineer designs a piece of technology or implements a piece of technology, whether it's a product or some kind of infrastructure, it has a different relationship with the world than if a doctor performs a surgery or a lawyer defends someone in court. The breadth of the possible impact, of course, is not just with the individuals that the engineer is working with on the project, because, again, the nature of technology, that the potential impacts of what the engineer does are incredibly wide. So that has to be there, I think, the first canon. On the other hand, it does raise some problems. How do you realize this relationship, this obligation to protect the public, especially when we look at Canon 4, which says to act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. This is, if the first canon is the heart and soul of engineering ethics, then the potential conflict between the first canon and the fourth canon is really what turns out to be the substance of much of engineering ethics. Canon 4 is about clients and employers. Canon 4 is about being a faithful agent of them. And to be an agent of them means to explicitly act in their interest, to carry out projects in their interest. Most of the time, I think the vast majority of the time, there is no conflict between doing that and holding paramount the health, safety, and welfare, health, and welfare of the public. But there are these paradigmatic cases that we look at where engineers are put in positions where they may find it impossible to carry out both of these duties, the duty to protect the public and the duty to be a faithful agent of the client or employer. And this, we'll save this to week 10, but there is, of course, a major difference between being an employee on the one hand, an employed engineer, and being an engineer that has clients on the other. And it's really not so clear that the ethics are the same in terms of fidelity to one's client and fidelity to one's employer. It does seem to me to be a kind of problem with the code, and that's why we'll read Thomas Templin's work at the end of the quarter, which is he was a honor student from a few years ago who I assigned him to do this project about the fourth canon and whether there are problems. And he did a very good job, so we'll read his stuff. So yeah, first canon, fourth canon, fifth canon, avoid deceptive acts. This really, if we look into the specification of it in section 2, it's section 2, 5b, which really lets us know that the fifth canon really covers financial things, conflict of interest, bribery, other forms of financial corruption, which we'll look at, gift giving, quid pro quo, pay to play, things like that, which is a very big issue in any professional ethics. And certainly if we look at board of ethical review cases, a lot of them have to do with the propriety of the giving and receiving of gifts. Like engineering, like everything else, happens in the real world. It's very much enmeshed in the business world. And, again, just as the professional engineer or the engineer as a member of a profession, being professional, has to negotiate things like how do you be an employee of a company and a professional at the same time. So they have to deal with the fact that in the business world, things don't always seem to be on the up and up. And how do you negotiate that? Be a part of the business world and be a professional. It can be very difficult. So take a look at this code of ethics. I've also included an interesting article about, kind of a summary of different opinions about the usefulness of codes of ethics, whether they actually do any good, which is something we should think about. It may be that the code is well-intentioned but useless. It's really completely up to you to think. But take a look at that too, to get some idea of what people think about codes of ethics in general.